Guys, welcome back to the Relaxed Running Podcast. Tyson Popplestone here. I'm your host. Thanks for stopping by. You've stopped by on a really good day, and I know I've been saying this a little bit lately, but it just so happens that we've been getting some pretty cool guests. Today's guest is no exception. Now, before I tell you who he is and what he's done, let me tell you about how I got connected with him. So, this guy, his name's Chris McCormack. You might know him as Macca. He's a gun in the Ironman world. I'm going to give you the details in a minute. I was nervous reaching out to him because I read his book a few years ago. I admired him from a distance in his triathlon many years ago. And I saw photos of a mutual friend of mine, Brenton Ford from Effortless Swimming, had a few photos on his website with him and Macca. And I thought, hey, beautiful. What a great setup. These guys know each other really well. I'll use Brenton as a segue into organising this podcast. So I messaged Macca on Instagram. I go, Macca, friends with Brenton Ford, would love to get you on the show. Now, I did that as a name drop. Anyway, I caught up with Brenton the day after I sent him the message. And Brenton goes, mate, I haven't even asked him on my show yet. I don't know him super well. So it was a little bit lucky that he didn't just tell me to go away. Both of them, actually, Brenton and Macca. But it worked out really well. Now, Macca is an easy bloke to talk to. He's a storyteller. He's a fun bloke. He's a tell it like it is kind of guy. This was honestly such a fun conversation. We had to cut it off after like an hour 15 because I told my wife to come back in about an hour. It was really cold outside and I could see her after an hour 15 just standing on our patio freezing. She had our son in the carrier and I was like, mate, I'm about to get divorced if I don't let her back inside. So I had to end it with Macca, but I'm really keen to do a part two because I genuinely felt, and I think you'll notice, we could have talked for hours and hours. It was a really enjoyable chat. Now, if you don't know who Chris Macca McCormack is, I've got a few notes here for you. He started out as a distance runner. He wanted to be a marathon runner. He admired the likes of Dee Castella, Steve Monaghetti. He grew up as a swimmer as well, so he was a pretty good runner, pretty good swimmer. And one day, as an 18-year-old, beat Greg Welsh over, I think it was an aquathon. So if you don't know Greg Welsh, one of the top Aussie triathletes of all time, Greg Welsh said, mate, come on. Come and give triathlon a crack. It's a funny story about what Macca thought triathlon was at that stage, but you can look forward to that one. He went on to win the Ironman World Champs twice, 2007 and 2010. He was a winner of the 97 ITU World Cup and 97 World Championships. Honestly, some of his winning streaks, some of his race styles, just some of the stories that this guy tells were just mind-boggling. So if you're wondering what a triathlete can teach us about running, the answer is a whole heap. He knows he's running well, but more than that, I was fascinated by his mindset. I was fascinated just by his training. I wanted to know how it was that he did what he did so successfully. It was a really great chat. I'm really excited for you to listen. If you do enjoy it, actually, I'm going to get my phone right now. Had a couple of reviews coming through for the podcast the last couple of weeks. Been really, really good and very generous. So if you've been enjoying the chat, leave us a review. This is what Susie MC71 said. Insightful and entertaining, which it's nice for my ego. It's a must-listen podcast for runners of all levels. Good length of episodes so you don't lose interest. Great range of guests. Particularly enjoyed the recently posted Emma Carney episode. Such an inspiring athlete and coach. Great stories. And yes, it's okay to be competitive. So refreshing. Also recommend the Jai Edwards, Matt Ramsden episodes and looking forward to hearing from Raf Bow once again from over in WA. Another one from our great man, Dion Finocchiaro. We're going to get him back on the show soon. Listen to many running podcasts, but Tyson has a real way with words. I've just called myself kind. He didn't even say that. And communicating with his guests. He goes beyond the box of what topics are trendy and stumbles across some incredibly good stories from guests that you're going to struggle not to be inspired by. So, guys, if you're enjoying it, go over, leave a bit of love. I don't know exactly what it does, but I'm pretty sure it ranks us higher on Apple Podcasts, which means more people get to hear about Relaxed Running Podcasts. Good news for me. I hope it's good news for you as a fan of the show. Anyway, thank you for being here. I'm going to get out of your way and introduce to you the great man, Chris Macca McCormack. Awesome. Well, hey, just before we hit record, we were laughing because you say, mate, it's been a while since I've been out training in the running scene. I don't know if I'm going to have too much to contribute, but I was saying that I was just as interested to pick your mind about mindset and triathlon as I was talking about running. And I did a quick tune-up listening to Brad Beer's podcast with yourself a few years ago. And as I said to you, I heard you mention Mona and Deke and just before we hit record, Troopy. So I thought we're in good company when it comes to this. So I reckon there could be plenty to take away from the running world from you.
All that old Malcolm Norwood, Pat Carroll days. I used to buy Fun Runner magazine and live through it. It was awesome.
That must be a few episodes ago, actually, or a few magazines ago. I've never heard of the Fun Runner.
Yeah, it used to be years ago. Fun Runner was the 90s. You used to flick to the back and find all the fun runs. Pre-internet, mate. Back when it was raw and
I didn't know there was a time where you couldn't get information off the internet.
Yeah, it was. Yeah,
man, that's funny. Hey, we were having a laugh before I hit record because you said you went to school with Troopy, and you reckon he wasn't that flash as a teenager.
No, I used to run against him. He was part of the Victorian group, and there was what was his name? McMahon. Steve McMahon was the best Victorian at the time, and Troopy was sort of probably the third or fourth best Victorian. He's a little smaller athlete, but he always had that mongrel in him, but he wasn't the talent that he was always a talent. He was at national level, but he didn't show those flashes of brilliance, at least at national level at high school, that he ultimately showed as a runner. But it's funny. The athletes you think are going to make it and go on to do amazing things. It's how I think Michael Power down then in Victoria was really, really strong. And was that they were a little bit, there was a really strong younger group than us. Me and Troopy are 73, 74 born. And there was that 1976, 77 group of athletes, Michael Power and born then, that were just amazing, like so strong.
So how serious were you in the running scene before you got across to triathlon? Were you running was the goal originally, I heard?
Yeah. I wanted to be a marathon runner. Yeah, I was inspired by Deke. Deke was my absolute idol. And then obviously Monas came along. I remember watching Monas at the 1986 Edmonton Commonwealth Games in the marathon, where he came third. We were all tuning in to watch Deke win. He won his second Commonwealth Games marathon that year. And Monas sort of came across for third, and then I tuned in at the 87 World Champs, Bruce McAvaney calling it, and that was in Rome, and Monas finished fourth in the marathon to Douglas Wakahuru, and there was Ahmed Salah and Jalindo Bourdin, and I was just, that's what I want to do. I just want to be a marathon runner and be like Monas. Monas and Deke. It was just an amazing time. We had depth across the board then, as you know, even back here in Australia, you had Johnny Andrews, Jamie Harrison, New South Wales-based athletes, and you had the old that old brigade. There was Steve Poulton, and there was a really good New South Wales group, and the group, they were about 5 or 6 years older than I was. Some of them probably 10, and we used to run with them as kids. But they used to breed this whole interstate rivalry about New South Wales versus Victoria, and really for us in running, Victoria was the one. It was immense satisfaction out of beating Victorians. I didn't really have much animosity towards South Australians or Queenslanders. I didn't really think about, but there was that real core Victorian running base out of Ballarat and Melbourne, and that New South Welshmen were very intrigued on dethroning if we possibly could. So that was really instilled into me. But Deke and Monas being two Victorians, it was always, it was Jamie Harrison and Paul Arthur and the group up here that were driving the younger generation of us to try and follow in the footsteps of those guys and dethrone them. But Victoria just had so much depth.
Man, it's funny being on the other side of that coin, because I remember growing up as a junior, looking up at Sydney and going, all right, you know what? I felt that same animosity towards you guys. I'd be on the start line and you guys just seem to produce quality athletes. Like there was always some random coming out of Perth or some random coming out of Adelaide or just some random coming out of somewhere. But there always seemed to be a big chunk of athletes from Victoria and a big chunk of athletes from New South Wales who were always bound to put up a pretty good fight. But what was your story? What was your introduction into the running world, man? Was that part of the family blood, or how did you find your way into wanting to be a marathon runner originally?
Yeah. My father grew up in the eastern suburbs of Sydney, like Bondi. And when he had us, the boys, we lived in a small place. So he moved to the south of Sydney, which is down in the Sutherland Shire. And we lived on our back doorstep was the national park, like endless, the biggest national park in Australia. So we used to mountain bike ride and motorbike ride. And my dad had given up cigarettes. So as part of his quitting cigarettes, he used to run just every time. So I used to go running with him. So I fell into running just by going running with my dad. It was just absolutely natural. I had no idea I had any talent in it. We just used to run through the forest and I used to ride. So we're very, very active. And then it was just a perfect breeding ground. And around here, because there was a strong running community with St. George Running Club and Sutherland Running Club based on this national park, there was such a core big group of former Olympians and runners that lived here. So it was, you joined the Sutherland Cross Country Club, where there was 8 Olympians that had been to Olympics running. So as a young 10 and 12-year-old kid, you're exposed to to some amazing mentors, and I just got swept up in it. I thought it was cool, and obviously you get, the more you work at something, you get better. And I just run with my dad, then I got a running coach, and all my friends became in running, and it was all around that beautiful time of Monas and Deeks, and so there was such great mentors to look up to. So I loved it, and I was, sort of came out of that '84 Olympics. I was 11. I watched that and thought, wow. And Deek finished 5th in the marathon, and then obviously we had the Seoul Olympics in '88. But between, I'm sort of at that perfect age of 10, 11, 12, you start to become relatively impressionable. And I sort of really pivoted towards those guys. I looked up to those guys to really want to emulate what they were doing. So I bought Deek's book. I think every runner back then Deek had multiple books, but he had the Green Deek book, which used to be the book that told the story of all his marathons and how he ran them in 5K segments. And then we had we used to call it the Red Deek book, which was more a how to train book. And I lived vicariously through those books. Like everything that he did, I did. I molded my whole training week on Deek's training week philosophy with Sunday long runs, Wednesday long runs, and it just became my life.
I think the rest of Australia's done that as well. I laugh with guests on this show because I reckon the training schedule of the average distance runner in Australia hasn't changed since 1974. Yeah. And I think it's all inspired by that red book.
Yeah, totally.
So, mate, were you running around on the track, or what was your event? The cross country? See, I see you now as in hindsight as the ultra distance man, but I know the origins when you're 11 or 12, you're trying to find your way into distance running. You got to you work your way up.
Yeah, no, I won I won 5 national titles, but my father, coming from Bondi, was and that's probably how I got into triathlon. Was I grew up in the surf club, so even though I was a runner, in summer we did surf club. So my dad was a beach bum, loved it, surfed, and so we always surfed. But in the summer he didn't want to go and sit out at athletics tracks at 40-degree heat. He's like, right, we'll be active. Let's go to the surf club. You can we'll do cross country in the winter and surf club in the summer. So I definitely had that on-off switch, which I remember every cross country season, I used to think, that's it, I'm doing track this year. I don't care about surf club. And then, Dad had pushed me across to the surf club, and halfway through the surf club season, I'd be like, that's it, I'm just doing surf club this year. I'm never coming back to cross country. So it was this I just enjoyed competition. I enjoyed that blend. And because of that, I could swim. So most runners couldn't swim. So it was just by luck. Triathlon didn't really exist at that point, but I used to basically race the Pulsar Quartz Games, which my last track race in Australia would be late November. And sometimes you get early January if nationals were early, but I never really raced a lot of track nationals, but always cross country. And CHS, I was a public school, so I used to do CHS cross country, then all schools or clubs, and loved it. Just always representing in cross country. So my group of training partners here, back in the old guys might remember, was, James Barker. He was a great New South Welshman. He's probably 44 now. Tony Orcello, who's passed away, he was a great runner. Trent Wood was a great runner. And the older brigade for me was Steve Poulton, Paul Arthur, Michelle Dillon was in my age group, and Michelle became a triathlete as well. But it was a really, really good crew of athletes. Clinton Barter, who raced Julian Painter, they were all good runners, national champions across everything from track to cross country. But for me, I was the cross country guy. I just loved cross country.
Mate, I had no idea how quality a runner I was talking to. So I was using this as a little bit of a foundation to move into the real stuff. But 5 national titles, I reckon that puts you up there as one of the most prolific runners I've had on the show. I'm not sure how many titles Mona's had, but he didn't mention it in the podcast last week that he had 5. Could be a record.
No, they're schoolboys. They're under 16. They're not the elite ones. Remember, we're talking age specific here. I didn't win any. I won no elite national. I won an open state title here and I won novice. But by then I'd pivoted to triathlon, and that was just purely by luck and chance.
Yeah, so I was going to ask you about that. So, like, with such success at an early age, it is interesting that you decided to make that transition across to the 3-legged sport. So, what was the inspiration to move you across from a pretty successful junior career with 5 titles into the swim, bike, run scene?
Well, I got a running scholarship. So I finished school 1990, went to uni college 1991, and I took a running scholarship at New South Wales Uni, the Ben Lexon Scholarship. And I went to the university. So then I was training with the uni, and that was specifically run focused. And it was at uni that triathlon in New South Wales was really starting to become pretty cool. It was in the early 90s. Greg Welsh lived here, and there was races. And because triathlon and surf clubs was so closely integrated, and I was such a big member of the surf club. You know, a lot of people go, how'd you find from running to triathlon? But I as I was telling you earlier, I used to do surf club in the summer. So the triathlon scene really merged out of the surf club scene here in New South Wales. And I got talked into, I had a race with Greg Welsh, who had just won the World Championships in triathlon in 1990. And at that time, I'm 18 years of age. And we did a race together, and I outran Greg over 10. And it was on the beaches of Cronulla. And after it, we went for a swim because it was relatively hot. And he's like, oh, shit, mate, you swim all right. Have you ever thought of triathlon? Have you ever thought of doing it? And I said, well, I thought triathlon was modern pentathlon. I said, my exact words to him was, I can't ride a horse, mate. And he's like, no, triathlon is swimming, biking, and running. And then he was telling me about it. And then I started tuning in and seeing these duathlons and Adam Joyce and all. I'm like, shit. And they look pretty cool. And I remember the junior category back then, you'd win, actually. You know, anyone who grew up in running, you won the little, here in New South Wales, a little tiny silver and gold little coin with no engraving on the back, or a little ribbon. And that was, mate, you killed to get one of those. And in triathlon, I'm turning up to these triathlons, and the first junior would win $500. Like, I was working at Sizzler for $70 a week, thinking $500. Like, that's a shit ton of money, you know? Like, and so that's sort of, I thought I'll do a couple of these, and a lot of them were like back then biathlon, swim, run events, and they were at Coogee or Bondi, and you used to race Guy Andrews and Guy Leach and all these surf lifesaving guys that used to swim really good. But I mean, they'd run 35 minutes for 10K. So they would swim like 3 minutes into you, but you drop a 30-minute 10K, you fucking kill these blokes, right? Like, and there's $500. I'm like, give me, and that's how I sort of went from triathlon, went from running, started buying these triathlon magazines, just because I was at university thinking, this beats working at Sizzler. If I can race these every weekend, I can give up Sizzler, and I'm still being active and fit and still meet my running needs. But that's sort of how I pivoted across.
What did you say the event was where you beat Welshie? Because that's, I tell you, he's a better bloke than me. Because if an 18-year-old bloke came out and beat me when I was world champ over my event, I feel like I'd be doing my best not to encourage him, but just to steer clear of him and tell him to stay in his own sport. So it's first of all, a great effort by Welshie to give you a little bit of encouragement. But what was the story there? Because that sounds like a pretty huge day out at the office.
Yeah, it was our cross country club. So he used to come back from overseas. He was based out of the Sutherland Shire, and he raced our cross country club was so strong. Like, I mean, I remember back in the day, like literally every age group from under 14, men and women, there was a national medalist, or it was a very strong club, and used to move up. Even at 18, I could have raced juniors, but I used to race the Open 10, you know, and you'd have Paul Arthur and a lot of these great runners come along, and every now and then when Paul would be somewhere else, or Steve Poulton, or one of the strong New South Welshmen, I'd be able to get a race winner down a local club, and I used to always feel, it was funny because Greg Welsh was the first person I ever knew that ran in sunglasses. Now sunglasses are, back in the day, runners were pure, mate. You did not wear sunnies, and so he used to have these big sunglasses on. And I used to think, I've got to beat this bloke. Like, what a wanker at the time. And then he became an amazing influence on my life. He was the one that really pushed me into the triathlon, into the triathlon ranks. He's like, kid, you swim good and you run good. Like, how do you bike ride? And I've been riding to school, like I rode. So he pushed me to get a bike and sent me to a bike shop. And really, Greg Welsh was a massive influence in those early years. Just when I say influence, he wasn't standing by me writing programs or anything, but he gave me the push, or made me consider a new sport where I was so obsessed. You know, you're talking 99, we just come off the Auckland Commonwealth Games. Sebastian Coe had just been down here. Like, Sebastian Coe was my idol. Like, he'd just been down here at ES Marks. I'd interviewed him for our club. And I was a mega fan, like, of these guys, you know, Billy Abdi, like all these big runners. And I just wanted to go to, I was thinking Atlanta Olympics potentially as a marathon runner. And it was right at that time that Greg was sort of pulling me this direction. And at that time, triathlon was not in the Olympic Games. So it was definitely a decision around a different sport, different goals and objectives, with World Championships and potentially Ironman being the two goals that you chase within that sport. And that's and he really got me into, you know, tuning into the old Galaxy TV, watching these events overseas, sort of like nowadays it's probably kids don't realize, but it's sort of like what the Tour de France was back then. Back in the 90s, they had a 30-minute segment on the Tour de France on SBS every night, right? And you used to watch it, and I was enthralled by it. And it was the same with triathlon. You get these little 30-minute shows, or Bruce McAvaney would do a little 30-minute show, and we'd live off these VHS videos of these events. And I thought, man, this is actually pretty cool. Like, it's in Europe. It's a very different looking life than I'd envisaged of doing London Marathon or New York Marathon. And because if we all recall, 1989, Monners went to London. He ran 2:9:06 in the marathon. He was beaten by Douglas Wakahuru in a sprint finish in the London Marathon, and Bruce McAvaney called it with Chris Wardlaw in the middle of the night. And I sat up all night watching this marathon, and it was, Wakahuru, Monners, and Ahmed Salah, 1, 2, 3, and that was the 1987 Worlds, 1988 Olympic Games was those same athletes. Monners was 4, and so I was keen on experiencing a London or experiencing a New York and just winning one of those major marathons, which I look at now, it's never going to happen. But, as a kid, you dream just wanting to be that. And Monners was just such a incredible because he never really mentored me, but such an incredible person to look up to. He was a brilliant man, generous of his time, like for young people, just the perfect ambassador for running for any young kid. He was just a gentleman, an absolute legend, and a high race performer.
Yeah, no, it definitely is. It's funny you say that. I hadn't seen him for about 8 years, and I had him on the podcast last week, and he's talking about, he's like, mate, this is how we became mates through the running scene. I was thinking, far out. I think we're closer than I ever realized. But I think what was going on is he's just that encouraging personality where he just wants to see people, younger than him, older than him, around him, just do well in whatever it is that they're doing. And he's got that ability not only to inspire through his running, but actually through his words. And when you're a bloke like him, and as you're saying, you've competed at the level that he has, yet he's one of those blokes that you just start to tune into. When he speaks, you sort of listen, especially when it's about running. But it's interesting hearing you talk about the inspiration you got from races like that, because I know the early 90s, I reckon every triathlete was on the back of my Weet-Bix box. It was a little bit of a highlighted sport. I would have guessed, I was a young fella running around back then, so I can't remember super clearly what the two scenes were like or how they differed. But my guess looking back was in the 90s, triathlon seemed to be at its heyday, especially in Australia, in comparison to even with the quality athletes like Mona running around. I guess the allure of a sport like triathlon probably stood out a little bit more. And as you say, when they start backing it up with some paychecks, it makes it a pretty tough decision just to decide that you're going to run around for a little small silver medal rather than that $500 paycheck in a Sizzler work week.
Without question, it was the perfect time, because if you recall, on the surf club scene, they had the Uncle Toby Super Series with the Guy Andrews, the Guy Leaches, the Trevor Hendys, and that was a massive summer series in Australia. And what I think we benefited from the fact that Australia is very football heavy, so the winter months, forget sport. Unless it's football, you're getting no TV time. But in the summer months, all those codes are done. So the networks were looking for sports to stick on television. And triathlon got swept up in that Uncle Toby Super Series. They formed a series called the Formula One, Tui's Blue Series, which was a live televised series. It was launched in 1994. So I was just turned 20. So I just come into the sport. I'd done World Juniors as a triathlete. I was a really good runner. I was at university trying to keep my running scholarship. So they were always making sure I wasn't going too far down this triathlon route, and ensuring I did what I needed to do for the university. But the announcement of the Tui's Blue Series and the big money that was coming in and the live television, when you're a 20-year-old, you're thinking TV, sport equals chicks,
yes, that's simple mathematics, isn't it?
yeah. People are going to know who I am if I get in this series. So that was when I was like, I've just got to get on the TV, and I'm going to be like Trevor Hendy. And so every young triathlete at that point became really, really serious. And that was off the back of the sport we were benefactors to the fact that it worked for television. It was new and engaging. It had a big sponsor in Tui's, and then it became St. George Bank for many years. And we had this series of racing around the world. And by 1993, Sydney won the Olympic bid, or end of 93 here. And there was a lot of discussion at that point about triathlon going into the Olympics. And so I think they made that announcement in end of 95. So it was all, by that point, we were well and truly swept up in, definitely pivoted, because there was a national series here. there was some structure to triathlon, and it was no longer sort of this Mickey Mouse sport. I always tell people it's a little bit like I remember telling my dad I wanted to be a professional triathlete. It'd be like telling your father now you want to be a professional Spartan racer. It's the same sort of. It was very new, and people were like, "Oh, really? What do? You jump over obstacles?" And back then, it was like, "What do? You swim, and then what?" And then
where do you store your horse? Yeah,
exactly. It was sort of wet triathlon. Now everyone sort of knows what a triathlon is, but back then it was very big in America and Europe. But here in Australia, it was starting to take that grounding and that foundation. And I think what the Australian triathlon system benefited from was there was a lot of content from overseas that we're able to lean on, that we still do to this day with Mark Allen and Dave Scott. And they still talk about this race in the 80s in Hawaii. There was 5 people in it, but it's a very big race. But they had enough of this history. Americans have a great way of packaging a sport and telling them it's their sport, and we got swept up in that. And that's what got us into the Olympics, and the international system was put in place in the World Cup series, and it just went zoom.
Yeah. So 18, 19, you'd pretty much fully transitioned across, and that was the new sport, was it?
Yeah, but I ran my last nationals in 91, and then 92 I pivoted to triathlon. 93 I raced triathlon at World Juniors. Yeah, by that point, I've traveled to Europe, and that was when I first saw there was a professional element. It was the first time I'd left Australia as an athlete. And we went to Manchester in the UK for the World Juniors. It was the World Championships, but the Junior Worlds were there as well. And I got picked up post that to go and race in France, a club that how triathlon works, unlike running. In Europe, there's a club structure sort of very similar to football. So you get the contract to come and race for a club, a French Grand Prix, and you'll do 8 races in a season for them, and they'll pay you a salary. And so I got picked up after World Juniors, moved to a little town called Aix-les-Bains. And mate, loved it. Like, I was like, man, this is me. Like, I'm a pro athlete. This is unreal. And my dad blew up. He said, get your butt home, finish university. You got to finish. So I came back, finished uni, and became a pro 1995, moved to Europe and chased the season, chased the series, chased the dream, I guess.
Yeah, man, that's pretty unreal. So it sounds like the transition. I know when you look back with hindsight, it can make some of the big jumps sound very smooth and very small. But it sounds like it was a really quick transition to being a very good runner to a world class. I don't know if you were just a world class junior triathlete at this stage or a world class triathlete, but it must have taken a few people by surprise. Did it, just seeing this big Aussie bloke out there now winning these races, who they hadn't heard of sort of 18 years earlier? It's a pretty quick move across to a fully fledged professional athlete.
Yeah, well, a lot of the advantage I had, as I said, was most runners can't swim. So that's what Greg saw. I was a really good runner, but I'd grown up in swim squads as a kid. My dad was a surf clubby, so we grew up. All my brothers, we were the kids that got dropped at swimming every morning at 5:30 a.m. when we were young. Right, yep. So I could always swim. And the first race I ever did, the first triathlon, we were so raw. Like, triathletes wear wetsuits because they make you swim quick. But coming from surfing, wetsuits are for warmth, right? So I remember going to my dad drove me down to Wollongong, south of Sydney, first ever 1992. First triathlon ever. I'd done a few duathlons, bike runs, but this time I was doing my first triathlon. And we got there and we saw all these triathletes in wetsuits. So my dad, I went and checked the water temperature. I'm like, it's not that cold. I was like, it must be cold out in the middle. So we put our surfing wetsuit on. Like, we had no idea. We were muppets. We're complete utter muppets. And I swam, I chafed up, and I was like way back in the swim in the junior category, and it was non-drafting back then. It was 40K bike ride, and I'm riding my bike with clip-on bars. But I ran the fast run. I think I ran 31 and a half off the bike, which for a triathlete, most triathletes back then were running 35 minutes, like the 34 minutes. Like Greg Welsh had run 33. And so I ran through and I won the junior category. And I remember going off with my dad. I won a trip to Noumea. But everyone in Triathlon Australia had never heard of me. It was my first ever triathlon. They thought I cheated because I had the fastest run time by about a minute. And so they thought I'd cut the run course. So I got a phone call at home, and because I'd won a trip to Noumea for 2. So me and my brother were going to go to Noumea. That was the prize. Like, not like athletics where you won a little silver medal. I won a trip for 2 to Noumea for winning this triathlon. It was unreal. And then they rang me and they were challenging, asking me all these questions. And I thought they were going to take this medal off me, or this prize off me. I said, look, man, I'm the Australian champion runner. Like, speak to Greg Welsh. He's the one who told me to do this. He's like, oh, you know Greg Welsh? I said, mate, he's the guy that told me to do triathlon. And mate, you're not getting your prize back. I won fair and square. Tough luck. Get lost. And I hung up. And that was how that was triathlon. My first ever dealing with Triathlon Australia. Quite a hostile relationship, and then they ultimately rang me back and pulled me into their programming. They were sponsored by Cadbury back then, so they had a Cadbury Junior Elite program where you got fully funded. Like as a runner, it was just a different time. I mean, as a runner, we'd have barbecues and that to raise money to go to Pan Pacific Games, or you know what I mean? Like, yeah, to go to places, we'd have chicken raffles and stuff at the club. Triathlon had money. I remember getting picked for the Junior Worlds and got selected, and it's we're going for a month to Europe, and we're going to do these races. And the first thing my dad was like, "Who's paying for that, mate? I don't have that much money to send you to Europe for a month." I said, "Dad, it's all paid." He's like, "What do you mean it's all paid?" I said, "This Triathlon Australia pays for everything." You know, like we couldn't believe it. It was just, so it was a lot of that made the transition a lot easier. And I just had a big run, and it was a different time. Like you see the triathletes today, my generation, and probably one generation after me, we transitioned from one sport. You're either Craig Walton was a swimmer, Miles Stewart was a bike rider, and we learned the other two disciplines. Young triathletes now are growing up as triathletes. So their swim technique is flawless. What they're doing is unbelievable. Like the modern day triathlete they give the perfect example of, say, Javier Gomez, who's an Olympic silver medalist. You know, this guy runs a 28:20.
Oh my
10K,
God.
fresh 10K, but he's a swimmer. This is what I always argue with runners. I'm like, they're like, 28:20 is not quick. I'm like, yeah, but mate, he's a swimmer. You're missing the whole point of this comment. He would have made the Olympic final in the 1500 meters with Kieran Perkins in 1996. So I'm like, mate, you've got to understand what these athletes are doing now. Their distance between the best guys they're closing that gap, but their ability to do the three disciplines flawlessly are remarkable. So it's a completely different animal now. But I was fortunate. I was one of those transitioning. I was in that generation where most athletes had a flaw, and my strength was I was sort of the first one that was close across all three disciplines and was able to capitalize on that.
Yeah, I always loved it. I think I must have been in that original, well, maybe not quite the original crop, but as a junior, about 13, I was doing triathlon as well. And I was just lucky that the swim when you're 13 is about 200 meters. So you're in the water for about 4 minutes. And then I would get to the run, the 3K at the end, and feel like an absolute hero, because I would make up that couple of minutes that I couldn't swim in the run, come back and just think I was a god. But mate, to run 31 and a half off a bike, I can only imagine it's that feeling magnified. And I think there would have been a couple of girls watching that race to give you a little bit more of a strut as you finish. But yeah, was that a pretty universal thing in the triathlon world at that stage to see you? It wouldn't have just been Triathlon Australia going, mate, has this guy taken a wrong turn? Nearly everyone watching the race would have been like, hang on a second, like this is unheard of. This is not how you run off a bike ride.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I think they were shocked, and then I think they were excited that they had a big runner, because Australia at the junior level back then had a lot of surf club kids, a lot of swim bikers that didn't have runs. So I was the first sort of junior that came along with a big, in that age bracket with a big run. And, they always say in triathlon, you run for the dough. Like it's the swim and the bike set everything up, but the run is what you need to be able to deliver, because that's what you finish with. And there was myself and, Greg Bennett was coming. Craig Walton was an unbelievable Tasmanian, massive swimmer, massive biker. And that was our generation, and we were sort of closing that gap on our ability to do things, but ability to do the three disciplines very, very well. But my strength was definitely my run. I was the first guy to break 30 minutes off the bike, which was for 10K, which was a big thing in triathlon. Now they do it. Now they break 29, right? But back then,
is that right?
Oh yeah, man, mate. Oh yeah, and they are. Alistair Brownlee's. Hayden Wiles made the New Zealand Olympic team for running. For 10 and 5, like he's a national champion, like he's a gun. Like
that is hard to fathom, isn't it? That's
Alex Yee, the young kid for Great Britain right now for the running purists. Alex Yee's run a 13:16 5K. Sebastian Coe is trying to get him to stay in athletics.
I want him to as well.
Yeah, he's like, I'm doing triathlon. He may win the Tokyo Olympics. He just won the Leeds WTA, the World Cup event in Leeds. Decimated them on the run. He's had a bit of a fragile swim, but mate, Alistair Brownlee ran 28:20. He was sick of all the runners saying, "Oh, what was the run short?" He's like, "That's it." Went to a track meet in Stanford, raced all the best, and he finished second in the track. Actually, won the track meet, but all the runners ran 28:20. Like, I mean, legitimate athletes, mate.
That is insane. That is insane. My triathlon knowledge needs improvement because I honestly, there's Australian runners now who I would consider top Australian runners who they might run 28 and a half. And I go, oh my God, isn't he in form? That was disgusting. Mate, we got Stewie McSwain. I don't know how much you follow the Australian circuit at the moment. He's our best 5K runner now. He's capable of breaking 13, I think, but he's run 13:05. Another one of my good mates has run 13:14. It's just terrifying to think there's blokes that can do that, but they can also swim and bike ride. It's just, It's weird. It's almost strange that well, I guess when you can swim and bike, I don't know how much that prize money is still going well in the triathlon scene. It's maybe no surprise that they're sticking to that sport, but it's just incredible to get your head around.
And what you got to, I always say, and I realize it now I'm older, especially knowing a lot of the swimming Olympians and the running guys now, you just don't get the difference in that last 5% improvement, which is a single discipline focus, that you're just getting more of that volume in. You can't get that volume in as a 3-discipline athlete. So swimmers are swimming 80, 90, 100K a week, right? Same as runners running a bit more than that. But a triathlete swimming 40, right? So that big volume of work, that's the difference between swimming 14:40 like Grant Hackett and swimming 15:05 like Javier Gomez. Sure, it's 25 seconds. It's 50 meters over 1,500 in a swimming pool. But there's 60K a week difference of volume of work to get there. As we know, those marginal gains as you get better is the hardest thing to do. And it's the same on the running side. They're just not getting the consistent volume. They're getting the aerobic work out of their bike and swim, but you're not getting that efficiency and that running that comes with a little bit more volume. And that's where they try and balance this fine line, and they're getting really close to I think the perfect triathlete at the moment. What they're doing is remarkable.
Yeah, it's funny because you still hear from time to time, and I think I was in this conversation at the end of my running career thinking, okay, well, I'm a pretty good runner. Maybe I'll just make that move across to the triathlon and just tear it up there. But you have no idea, or maybe in your naivety, you have no idea of the quality of runner and bike rider and swimmer that you're coming up against. Mate, that's sort of blown my mind. But I'm gonna have to start doing some more research and reach out to some of these triathletes for some more running advice.
Yeah, some really good Hayden. I can tell you some really good runners. Hayden Wilds, they're just so raw and young, and they have no barriers, right? They have no preconceived. Oh, that's a quick time. I'm like, dude, that's a really quick time. You know what I mean? Like, I just ran 3K in 7:58. I'm like, quick, dude. You know,
that's very impressive, mate. So you were saying, sorry, I've taken you down a random rabbit hole, but this is what I was saying. They're the most fun to go down sometimes because there's so much information that just came out of that, sort of blown my mind. But before I took us down there, you were telling me you just moved over to France. You'd been picked up by the team, so you were racing around Europe at that time. With like a core group of guys, and that was pretty much the beginning of your international career, where you're going, all right, this is my thing, this is legit. I'm gonna take this under my wing and just go with it.
Yeah, it was sheer chance. So as I said, I got selected for the Australian team. The Australian team flew out of Sydney. A race for World Championships were in Manchester, the UK, mid-August, August 15. So we got in there late July, 20th of July. We did a couple of races in with the Australian team. So you're flying exactly like athletics, you're elite men, elite women, junior men, junior women. And we traveled around Europe. We based in Bolton in the UK, raced world champs. And I had the world champs one, and I ended up hitting hands, and it's a big story in triathlon. And I ended up getting beaten, got second. And
what was it, down the home straight?
Yeah, I was celebrating, and I got passed by a Swiss guy. And so every junior in the Triathlon Australia right now steals that story. Run to the finish line. Don't be a dickhead like Macca. And so because of that race, I got picked up a French club. And, oh, look, why don't you come and race for our club? And I'm like, oh, I've got to go back to uni. And they said, oh, we'll pay you 1,000 back then, 1,000 Deutschmark, or 1,000 Deutschmark, which is 1,000 Australian dollars a week. I'm like, $1,000 a week? Fuck, I'm done, mate. I'm going. I'm like, in. I rang, and so back then it was primo. I rang my dad. So, Dad, I'm deferring uni and I remember him blowing up on the phone, but the money ran out in the payphone. Back then it was like there was no internet stuff, so it's just like, oh, I'll speak to you in a couple of months. And I flew to France and started racing for this club. So back when you race for a club, I left the Australian team. Now I'm on my own, and I moved into France with a bunch of French guys from juniors, and then we just traveled around France. And it was my first time in France, in the Alps, and we're living up on the Swiss border, and it was unreal. I was racing these club races, and with my uniform on and getting paid $1,000 a week. What, mate? I was 19. Like I'm thinking $1,000 a week. Like I said, I was getting $70 a week at Sizzler. Like, I mean, I thought, this is my life. I want to be a pro. This is it. And then they gave me a contract for the following year. But when I flew home, my dad's like, no, you're finishing university. So you're not going back to, so I had one more year of uni. So I deferred 94 and didn't race. And I gave my contract to another Australian, Greg Bennett, who went across to race for the club. And so in 94, I finished uni, graduated at the end of 94. 95, I was still racing in Australia. But now I was working. Took a job at Bankers Trust. And I hated it, man. I just wanted to get back to Europe, but I thought I'd missed my window of opportunity. No club's going to take me. They don't even remember me. And when you're a kid, 1 year feels like an eternity. And then I had some great racing locally, and then plucked up enough money to quit my job, and I just moved to Europe and chase it. That was the beginning of 95.
So what was the relationship like with your old man at that stage? I guess at 19, you're probably still living at home, were you? And he's probably got your best interest at heart, trying to make sure that you're secured for your future, because he's doing what he thinks is you're doing what he thinks is the equivalent of a Spartan race. Despite how well it's going, you're over in Europe. He's probably not seeing it a whole lot. So, like, was there a little bit of tension? Was there a little bit of bitterness going on there, or how did you navigate that 12 months?
I think he was disappointed I remember being very, very nervous of telling my father, because my father was adamant that his three boys would be educated. He didn't have an education, so he got that, and I guess every father wants their kids to be on the right path, right? And so I had a job at Bankers Trust, and I was in finance, and I just done a commerce degree, majored in accounting, and he was happy. I hated it, but Dad was happy, right? And I remember thinking, I'm 19, 20, like I'm 20. Actually, at the time I was 21. And I'm like, this can't be my life, like Monas, you got to be brave, I've always wanted to be an athlete, or at least just experience it. I didn't know, you have no guarantees you're going to be any good. I just want to go and be on the circuit for a bit. And so I plucked up the courage to tell him, and he was like, look, if you're going to do this, do it properly, son. Like that was his advice. I think he was semi-disappointed. And when I left in April of 95, I didn't come home, but I came home world number one, and the World Championships that year, the end of 97, 98, were in Australia. And that was we're going to the Olympics, the Olympic qualification. I was world number one within 2 years, and I hadn't been home for 2 years. And when I came back and we won, Perth World Championships were in November of 97, and the whole world was down here. And it was all talk about Sydney Olympics and these events that Australia was dominating, and triathlon was one of them. We had the best women in the world, and myself and Welshie and Brad Bevan and that had just arrived as the best triathletes. And I'd refined my swim, so I got my swim good. I was a really good bike rider technically, because I'd grown up on mountain bikes, and I was now living in France on the descents, and my run was a weapon. So I won worlds in 97 with my dad there, with 200,000 people on the course in Perth. It was unbelievable. Live TV in Australia. And that was, I think, when my dad was like, shit. I said, Dad, this is what I do. Like, I'm going to win like an Olympics, man. Like I'm Monas, I want to be Monas, mate.
Yeah.
And that was sort of the beginning of the whole journey I felt like I'd arrived. I was definitely a pro athlete then, definitely had a lot of international success. And I realized this sport there was a lot of momentum behind this sport, and especially out of Australia, where the government was really throwing their support around that Australian cultural identity with successful sports at the Sydney Olympics, and backing the sports where they believed Australia could win, and triathlon was one of those. And so was swimming and cycling, but we were benefactors of that momentum and that wave.
That must have been a pretty crazy experience for your old man, was it, when he watched you win the world champs? That was the eye opener for him. Hey, that was all right. He's made the right choice moment.
Yeah, I think he realised when he crossed the finish line, and we're looking down the crowds. It was like the Tour de France. It's on YouTube. It was unbelievable. It was in Perth, and the last mile, I'm just running. I couldn't even see the finish line, and Australia hadn't won a World Championships for 12 years, and here I was, the world number one, this young punk that was 3 years into the sport, and Welshie's behind me, and we had World Championships back in Australia. And I remember running at the crowd going, I don't want to miss this turn into the finish line. And I was peeling out the way. And then I came around, and they got the barricades back. And I remember turning into this finish straight, and it was packed, man. And I could see at the end of it, they got my mum and dad out of the crowd, and they were across the finish line. I've crossed the line. I'm like, there's a static collapsed, and I was in tears.
Yeah.
My dad picked me up, and I said, this is Dad, this is what I do, man. This is it. And he's like, I have never been so proud of you. And that was basically I guess I've been chasing this voice in my head for 18 months, 2 years. And that was sort of I can relax. I've done the right, I've made the right choice. Dad's happy with me. And now I want to try and be the best I can be at this.
That is an unreal story, man. I can't imagine. See, as a junior, like my imagination would run wild. You'd picture your family up in an Olympic stadium, you coming around the home straight, and everyone going nuts. It's crazy that you get to live that. And I can only imagine, man. We had a little man about 9 months ago now, 10 months ago, and already I'm like, far out. I feel proud enough of him just as it is to imagine him doing anything more than just crawling around the house. I can't imagine how proud I'd be. So that'd be just a mind blower for your mum and dad. And what after that you actually, sorry, before we go on, I took a mental note to say to you before. I don't know if you've listened to Matthew McConaughey's book at all, but a random pivot. But man, he's got this story where his old man sounds a little bit like what yours was. He's like, no, it's about education, it's about hard work, and it's about just doing the best you can, in this world that I understand as your parent. And he said, mate, he was shitting himself because he'd decided that he wanted to go into acting. He'd decided that this is going to be the world for him, and his dad just didn't get it. And he said he mustered up the courage one day just to give him a call. He goes, all right, Dad, like I've been scared to tell you, but this is what I'm going to do. And his old man goes, all right, mate, well, don't half-ass it. And he goes, it was just the tick of approval. Like, all right, if you're going to do it, let's just go for it. And I reckon that'd be a pretty powerful thing to get the bloke who you're most scared about telling on your side.
Yeah, you just don't. I think, you don't want them to be disappointed because your intentions are right. And I guess I see, now I've got kids. I understand where Dad's coming from. You just want the best for your children, and the unknown is scary. So you're always prepared to bet the safe option. But I think I was able to show Dad that pursuing a passion, pursuing something that intrigued me and fascinated me, that he brought into my life through running. That's what I remember saying to Dad. I'm like, Dad, you brought me to sport. You brought me into this. I love what I do. I absolutely love it. And most people, you've always told me, don't love what they do. And you've always encouraged me to pursue what I love. This is what I love. And forget the outcome. I don't care if there's no money here. I just want to do this. And I'm a good kid. I'm not going to jail. I'm not. And I understand the responsibility that I have to myself and my future. So I'm not going to stuff this up, and I will walk away at the right time. And I'm not just going to holiday for the next 15 years, Dad. If this doesn't go anywhere, I get it. I know your concerns, and I won't let you down. And that was sort of the attitude I always push with Dad, and he was super supportive.
Yeah, awesome, man. And then, dude, I was having a bit of as I said, I was having a bit of a read up on you and listening to a few podcasts just to try and get my head around. But one of the stories that stood out to me that I love, that I was hoping you could tell, was how you got in contact with the blokes from Under Armour, because I thought it was both a funny story and also one of those moments where it was like, okay, this was just clearly a story which was meant to be.
Yeah. I guess that's the lucky thing about triathlon. Like Kevin Plank, he started Under Armour. I call him a close friend. He came to my wedding. It's amazing. He's a multi-billionaire now. I win for Christmas every year. But he's my age. He's a year older than me, Kevin. And I met him. I met Kevin 2001 at an event in San Francisco called Escape from Alcatraz Triathlon. Big Americans do. Yeah, everyone knows Americans do events. They live in their own bubble a little bit. And this is the biggest event in the world, Escape from Alcatraz. And it's not the biggest event in the world, but in America, it's a big event. And it's live on CBS and NBC television, and it's a huge race. Anyway, so I used to go every year because every sponsor used to make you want to go there, because that and Hawaii were big races. And I won it a few years in a row. Anyway, after the race, I won it, and I'm sitting down. They always have these big things. And I was waiting for my wife, my girlfriend at the time, but she's now my wife. And I was sitting just on the grass, and I'm chatting away, and so these three guys sitting with me, sitting on the grass next to me, eating their food from the free truck that you get free food post finish line. I'm, hey guys, how'd it go? And they were all eager to talk. I didn't know who they were. They were just young, like my age. We got chatting, and they're like, first triathlon, and I'm like, oh mate, how'd you think? What happened? And at that time, they started the presentation, and we're just talking about their race and what they thought of the climbs and what they thought of the run. It's a really difficult race, and they got a really big sand ladder, and they'll tell him about their experience on this 500-meter soft sand ladder section of the run. And anyway, the commentator's like, and the winner is Chris McCormack. So excuse me, guys. I go up on stage, do my speech, and I come back down, and Kevin and Ryan's his business partner in Under Armour, are like, shit, dude, like, you won the whole race. I'm like, yeah. I won. Why didn't you tell us? Like, we feel like dickheads. Like, I said, oh, mate, we're talking about your race. I said, they're like, shit. And anyway, the guy he was with was a guy called Chip Adams. And Chip was at that point funding Under Armour. He was their first investor to help Under Armour become, this was pre-Under Armour going public. And Kevin's like, Ryan, actually, Chip and Ryan said, do you know who we are? I said, no, they had Under Armour. I said, no. I said, we own Under Armour. I'd never heard of it. I was like, oh, okay. I said, oh, okay, I'm Chris McCormack. I'm from, so you've never heard of Under? I said, no, it's a deodorant. I thought it was deodorant. Yeah. And I was like, oh, you're deodorant. And this Chip Adams, who was there, cracked up. Like, and Kevin sort of semi took it the wrong way. Like, I can't believe you. If you watch American football, I'm like, not really, mate. No, I don't. And they were shocked. And they're like, look, man, if you're ever in Baltimore, here's my card. Stay in touch. You got to come up and say, Under Armour, I can't believe you don't know our brand. I said, okay, mate, it's my bad. And he's like, mate. So we got on pretty well. We ended up going for lunch and we stayed in touch. And I was in New York the following year. And I used to email Kevin all the time. And I said, mate, I'm in New York. He's like, mate, come down to Baltimore, get on the train, come down to Baltimore, I'll put you up for the 4 seasons and you're coming to Under Armour. I want you to come. So, okay. I remember saying to my agent, oh, mate, we're in New York. And I hadn't even told Scott, my agent, that I met these Under Armour people. So we're in New York and I said, oh, mate, I'm going to Baltimore. I'm meeting this guy I met at Alcatraz last year, Kevin Plank. And Scott looked at me going, Kevin Plank, I know that name. I said, oh, he owns a clothing company called Under Armour. He's like, Under Armour, dude. Like, they're pretty big, man. Like, they're having a crack. I'm looking, they're in football. He's like, dude, they're in everything, mate. Like, they're a new brand. They're about 5 or 6 years old, but they are on the up. They're cool, like American footballers are using it. And so Scott came down and we met Kevin, and Kevin toured us around the old Under Armour. They just bought the factory behind the sugar mill on the Baltimore Harbour there. And, I walk around and we went out for dinner with Kev, and Kevin's like, what do you think? I said, I think you should sponsor me, mate. And they had not sponsored, they don't sponsor a single athlete. I said, you're going to sponsor me, Kevin. I'm your first ever. So I became Under Armour's first ever sponsored athlete. And I was with them from 2002 all the way through my career. I got a life deal. I still sponsored by Under Armour.
Is that right? That is such a good story, man. I was laughing listening to you tell that story. It just the chance of bumping into him. I
call Kevin a close friend. Amazing story. Like, that guy. Like, we always see it in sport, and we talk about hard work and focus on a goal and all that stuff from a sporting perspective. But when you see an individual do that from the ground up for a company, it's the same work ethic, man. Like, they work and drive and push and inspire and bring people with them. It's amazing to watch the evolution of that company. I'm so proud of them. Like,
it's funny, man.
It's part of that journey the whole way along. Like me, Michael Phelps, George St. Pierre, like, we, prior to the Rio Olympics, were in Brazil together, opening Under Armour shops, flying the private plane, going, Kev, man, like, you're a billionaire, dude. Like, it was just us. Like, all right, and he's your mate. You know what I mean?
That is so strange. That is so you and The Rock, eh? You and The Rock.
Yeah, The Rock. Well, The Rock came later. It used to be Big E. They were always heavy in movies and stuff, but The Rock, they moved into that big movie scene. But back in the early days, it was very, very athlete specific, very American football. But Phelps, he came along, which I got on well with Michael. And George St. Pierre at the height of his career came along. And then they brought Canelo Alvarez, a lot of the boxers, Eric Morales, and I'm a big boxing fan. So I used to go to all the Super Bowls. I used to go to everything with Kevin. But flying the private jet, the Under Armour jet, just from meeting a guy at a triathlon. And I've always said triathlon, I've been very, very lucky in triathlon because it's a very community-driven sport, because you're bringing 3 different sports together, and it's very inclusive. It's a very inclusive sport. No one's judging you if you're the slowest or the fastest. And I guess it's like fun running to some degree, but the demographic, the individuals that tend to migrate to triathlon as they age, are very successful business people. They sort of build these big businesses, and they're highly competitive individuals, and they find solace in triathlon because there's such a great age group structure around the world where you can compete and compare yourself with others, and it's an amazing community. And I was definitely a benefactor of being one of the top athletes during that period of time. And
what a story, man. Macca, so it's interesting just talking about the massive success that you had in the I guess the sprint distance triathlon, the ITU sort of distance. But what inspired the move? Because I sort of know you now, coming in a little bit later. I know you as the Kona man. I know you as the real Iron Man. So what was the transition into the real long stuff?
Yeah, I think I went through. I guess everyone has a national federation story to some degree. So I was always relatively I was world number one through 1997, 98. I dropped a couple of times, but 99 I was moved back up to world number one ranking, and I was living at that time in France, and I used to do my summers in South Africa, and I used to just come back to Australia for the national series here, which was 8 weeks of racing, right? So I didn't spend a lot of time in Australia, and at that point they were really starting to pivot these high performance structures, high performance programs, which triathlon had never known before or done. It was our first ever Olympics. At least running and swimming probably had years and years of experience of high performance camp, but triathletes were always sole traders doing their own thing and coming together at the end of the year. And it was just coming together for world championships or world cups, but it was all based on if you're good enough. When you start to bring Olympic qualification in, and maybe there's all discretionary selection and all this ass kissing stuff you have to go on and do. And I was just not my cup of tea doing that stuff. And my mother passed away, so I won the Sydney test event, or the Olympic test event, not the test event in Sydney, but I won the Olympic trials in Japan in April of 2000. The first event. My mother passed away 3 weeks later, and there was another test event which was in Sydney, which was 5 months before the game. So my mum passed. I didn't race the test event in Sydney. I didn't read the qualification criteria. I just thought, look, I'm world number one. I've won the first thing. You're going to pick me, right? And because I didn't race the Sydney event, and they forced me to race an event in Mooloolaba on Mother's Day on May 13 that year, and they opted to not select me for Sydney, even though it was the biggest news. Myself and Emma Carney, it was the biggest news in, and I was devastated. And looking back now, I do get it. You're 4 months before an Olympics, and there's a young triathlete right now from America, Katie Zaferis. She's the world champion, world number one. She just lost her father 4 weeks ago. It's literally identical to the prep that I had. And she's about to be selected. The question marks whether she should be selected for the American team at the moment. I think she should be, right? But there's a lot of talk about her mindset. And so I understand it, because I was a mess. When my mother passed, I was a mess, right? And so they opted, they didn't think I had the right. And we're not talking about, and the other thing I got to give them credit for, which at the time I couldn't, the guys behind me that they picked ahead of me weren't like 100th in the world. I was number one, but these guys were number 3, 5, you know what I mean? So they were warranted. They had every right to be on that Olympic team in their own right. On any other day, they probably would have beat me. But so they didn't think I was in the right headspace, and the arsenal they had to fill my gap was strong. And so they put me as first reserve, and I took that as a real slap in the face. And so I went, up yours.
Yeah.
Not even coming back for Sydney, and stayed in the States with my wife. And then I was determined in 2001 to, whoever won the Olympics, who was a good friend of mine, so I was going to go everywhere in the world and just smash him every race. Right? and then every time I got the microphone, I was going to blame my federation, which I did. So in 2001, I had my greatest ever year. I won everything. Everything. And I had worlds won, but I crashed on the bike. I was 2 minutes front on the bike, but I crashed in slippery conditions in Canada. But I won Goodwill Games. I was world number one. I won the World Cup series again, won 4. And on the receiving end of that was a good friend of mine called Simon Whitfield, who was the Olympic champion. And I just, every race, I used to beat him. And then Triathlon Australia came back into my life and said, look, we made a big mistake with Sydney. We fixed that. It was our first ever Olympics. We're moving towards Athens now. Come across and look at the Athens course with us. It'll suit you, and you do it. And come back into the fold, leave America and come back to train with us. And Commonwealth Games were coming up in Manchester, and I'd already been pre-selected for Com Games. So they're like, look, you're in the Commonwealth Games. We'll prep for that. And but you need to move back. Let's go down the AIS. I'm like, I'm not moving back to Australia. Like I'm winning races from here. I'm not moving my base. I've got my coaches, my swim squads, aren't you supposed to support my journey, not create? And Bill Daverin at the time, who was the new head of Triathlon Australia, said, well, Macca, what are you going to do? you either come back, I know you want to win the Olympics, you either come back for Athens, or what are you going to do, Ironman? Like, you're 28 years of age. You're too young, 27 odd, and you're too young. And I said, well, mate, pick me for Athens now, because I do not want to go through the same shit you put me through. Right? And no, I'm not in the right headspace, discretionary selection, because you don't feel like I'm worthy of it. Pick me and let me prep, and just leave me the hell alone. And I will prep. I want to win the Olympics. So you have to trust that my goals are aligned with your goals, right? Like, I'm not, if I make the Olympics, I'm taking it serious. It's my life. And they said, look, we can't do that. You have to come into the fold. We have a system. And I said, stuff you're going to do, Ironman. So they laughed, because they had all my testing data. And my testing data, I was never built to do Ironman, but there was nowhere else to go. You either did the ITU stuff or you did Ironman. And now they have a half Ironman series around the world that's really, really big. But back then there was either full distance or ITU, which was the Olympic distance. And I basically did Commonwealth. I did my first Ironman in April of 2002. So I'm having this conversation at the end of 2001 with the National Federation. They challenged me, I guess, said you either do it our way or you got nowhere to go. So I entered Ironman Australia. I said, I'll tell you where I'm going. And I went, and so I won my first Ironman on debut, which no Australian had done. We won it for the first time in 12, and I went down this Ironman path. But my goal was, ignorantly thinking, youthful ignorance was, I'll go and win Ironman Hawaii this year. That was my headspace. Like, I had no idea how hard this Ironman was. It's like a 5K running going, I'll go and win London Marathon. Then I'll come back, and it's like, and so obviously I won Ironman Australia, which was the hardest thing I'd ever done at the time, but I won it. So you just don't really check things. When you win, sometimes you don't thoroughly break down an event. The win hides a lot of the errors you may have made, because you hide behind the win. And so looking back, even though I won this race and I beat the world champion, I was first time an Australian had won in Ironman Australia for 12 years. And it was big back then, because there used to be 10 Ironmans in the world. So winning an Ironman meant something. Now there's 200 of the bastards. There's an Ironman on they're everywhere. The sport's exploded. But back then, to win an Ironman, you could back a year on that, sponsorship and everything. So I've gone out, won Ironman Australia on debut, and I've come off the ITU as world number one. So I'm the first world number one to win an Ironman. So I'm going to Kona thinking, mate, 2002, I'll win Hawaii. And then I'm going to come back and win the Olympics in Athens. It's going to be a no-brainer. And I got to Hawaii, and I'd never, mate, in my life experienced an event like that. It was friggin' hot, windy. I was inexperienced, dumb, and hollow, man. Like, I did not have the courage, the commitment, the strength of character to be successful in an event. It's like probably a marathoner experienced their first major championship marathon. Like, it's no joke. You're like, what you think is happening, what your preconceived ideas of it are versus the reality of the situation. I was heavily exposed. I had a 13-minute lead off the bike, thinking these guys suck. I high-fived my dad as I ran out of transition, thinking I'm about to win Kona. I'm going to be like Greg Welsh, my first attempt. And by 10 miles I was walking, at 21K I was out. It was horrific experience. But
sorry, Macca, sorry to interrupt. I was just going to say 21Ks, you were out of the race.
21K I stepped off. Yeah, I was in agony. I was buckled, cramping, dehydrated. And it was humiliating, because I honestly had this semi sense of invincibility. I hadn't lost a triathlon in 3 years. I hadn't lost a race. I've been, according to myself and everyone now, unfairly non-selected for the Sydney Olympic Games, right? And so I had a chip on my shoulder, a major chip. I'm young enough to carry that chip. Nowadays, it'd be like, oh, whatever. But back at that point, I felt that defined me, and I felt like I'd let my mother down, because I'd promised her that on her deathbed. So I guess I walked into Kona with a bit of arrogance, saying what I just said to you. I said, oh, look, I'm going to, I've just won Ironman Australia. I'll win this one this year or next year. And so the guys that are doing Kona, they're like, who's this upstart little shit? That's probably how I came off looking at it now. And I look back and I cringe a bit, and they were happy to see me humiliated. As I was running up Palani Hill, which is a famous climb on the World Championship course in Kona, Tony DeBoom, who is the brother of the world champion at that time, Timothy DeBoom, who was an American, and the Americans had won in 2001. It was post 9/11. So they were very proud of this American dominance of this event. And I've come in, this upstart Australian in 2002, going, I'm going to win this thing. Semi-disrespecting their guy that had won the last two. I'm like, because I'd raced him in 10 races and kicked his ass. So now I had Tim DeBoom in, and he ate beat me up. And I remember coming up Palani Hill, and his brother said, as I was walking, and his brother was telling Tim was about to pass me, I gave up a 13-minute lead in 10 miles. He said, "Welcome to Kona, punk." I'd really ruffled some feathers. So it was a very humiliating time. I didn't mean to ruffle feathers, but it was that chip on my shoulder that I guess I magnified in my own desire to prove a point to Triathlon Australia, but I guess I rubbed other people the wrong way too. So, and Kona became a puzzle of mine that took me, and basically my whole career went that way, and I turned my back on the Olympics to conquer it.
Far out, Macca. So how many years was it? Because I know there's a bit of a story here. Was it your fourth or fifth year that you
won. Yeah. So and the story, the thing that becomes, once you go down this Kona path in triathlon, it's like everything else is forgotten. Like I don't know if that happens in athletics and marathoning. Athletics seems to have more of a deep history. So you respect this transition up. The triathlon at that time, ITU and Olympics sort of sat, it was like another sport. And then Ironman was its own sport. And to some degree, triathlon still exists that way. Ironman is, most people now associate triathlon with Ironman. And they probably really don't know what's happening on the Olympic side of things, right? And so once you start down this Ironman path, it's all encompassing. And I did think I was going to win. So 2002, I didn't finish. Then I learned the hard way that not finishing an Ironman, it's probably like not finishing a marathon. You get criticized. It's like, mate, no matter what, you walk, you get to the finish. It's about finishing. And I'm like, yeah, but I want to race next week. But the community of Ironman, it's about you finish. And no matter what, you walk to the line. So I learned my lesson that one because I got deeply criticized for not finishing. And so in 2003, I thought, okay, I won Ironman Australia again. And I started down this path, and I went to Kona again and failed. I finished 32nd, again, led off the bike, crumbled on the marathon, ran a 3:19 marathon to walk to the finish, 32nd place. And I was, again, and what makes it the momentum of this, the only race I lost every year was Kona. This is why it became such a big thing in my story, was I would win European champs, world records, then Kona, fail. And it was and Triathlon Australia had done all this testing with me down at the Australian Institute of Sport, and they'd always said I could never be an Ironman athlete. I was too heavy, too big. I'm a 74-kilo racer. I just had too much surface area to handle those sort of conditions. And that was sort of like this carrot in front of me to prove them wrong, because they were my antithesis. They were my enemy at that point. In my head, Triathlon Australia, that's who I focused my anger on in order to get me out of bed every morning. And so then 2005, I finished 6th, but ran a pretty good marathon. In 2006, I finished 2nd. And so I got there after the 4th year, and 2nd was still, but it's great to come 2nd, but in my sport, you had to win it. And and suddenly you go from, I always tell the young kids now, if they're calling you a talent, it's because you haven't won anything. You're called champions of champions because they win events. So there was all this talk about Macca being this Ironman talent, but I hated being called a talent, because in my head, a talent is just someone who doesn't win anything. Oh, he's talented, because if they don't call you talent, they got to call you a champion, because you're obviously winning things. So I wanted to be the champion, and I was sick of being called a talent. I used to call people, I'm not a talent. I'm an athlete. They're all talented. Stop calling me a talented thing. And I could tell that the sport was starting to think, I don't think this guy's going to do it. So it took me the 5th attempt to finally win it in 07. And mate, it was tiring. It was a long, arduous journey. But yeah, Ironman consumed me. I was for years after that. And so I went and watched Athens and went and watched Beijing and became a fan of ITU. But at that point, which is probably why you know me as an Ironman athlete, I was well and truly on the Ironman circuit. And luckily for me, like ITU, Ironman started really growing up. It got bought by private equity, and I was the champion of it. And I had enough, I guess, the way I spoke, and I guess my hostilities at times towards some of my peers. I was the stupid guy that said the stupid things. You think you'll win? Yeah, I'm going to win. I'll kick his ass. Right? And the Americans love that. So they created a villain, not a villain, but I was happy to play that character, because I needed that type of pressure on myself to make me wake up at 5:30 for swimming, to make me wake up. So I sort of benefited from the rivalries that I was able to create, first with Norman Stadler and the Germans. Well, firstly with the Americans when I first came across, then with Norman Stadler, and then ultimately with Craig Alexander and Pete Jacobson. Then I retired.
Jeez, man. It sounds like you were bloody good at racing with frustration, racing with anger, racing with anger. Because I always noticed that myself when I was out on a track, if my wife and I had an argument before I went out, I was the opposite. I seemed to be like, I just need to solve this before I go out and focus. I couldn't put my mind on the track very well, but I don't know, maybe it was because it was so close to home, but it's interesting how that anger of the federation seemed to drive you, and the anger and that caused by the criticism or what do you say? The people talking about your lack of ability to win just seemed to be that thing that really got you up in the morning.
That. Yeah, I needed that. I know that I still have that in my life. I need a challenge. I need to put a goal out there. I need to vocalize that goal because I need to make it real. If I don't, I always find if you don't vocalize it, or you don't put it out to the universe, then you don't really believe it yourself. Now, I never realized, it was just my way of doing things. When I'd say, people would say, oh, how do you think you're going to go at World Champs this year? I said, well, I don't spend 18 weeks away from my family to have a holiday, mate. Hawaii is a nice spot, but I'm going to win the frigging thing.
Yeah.
Oh, what about this guy, mate? And I would say, how's he going to beat me? Because I was as much talking to myself as I was.
That's all. Yeah.
And then social media and everything came out, and everyone got to see what you say. Back in the day, it was an interview, and someone would write the letter. It was social media. It was like far out. So then my peers would text me going, "You're a dickhead. Why would you say that about me?" I'm like, I was just talking to a guy. You know, like I still think you're a nice guy, but yeah, I do think I can outswim you. I do think. What do you think? I don't think that in my head. I just don't verbalize it. Of course, you must think that about me. Like it's no hard feelings, but a lot of people took that the wrong way. A lot of my peers, and then I realized it would upset them, and I realized there's a lot of power in getting into people's heads, creating self-doubt, and being that alpha male. I think there's a lot of power in that, and Lance Armstrong showed me that following his career. I know he did other things, but he was really that alpha male and we knew Lance from triathlon for years, and watching how he came into that cycling sect, came into that tour peloton and ran the peloton with his presence. There's a lot of semi-intimidation. He did it. He went overboard, but there is a lot of question marks, and we all know it as athletes, that your biggest competitor is yourself, because you know all your inferiorities, right? You know where you are weak. You know, you try and charade that you've got none, right, to the public and to your peers, but you know deep inside that you're carrying an injury, or you're not running as good, or he's good in hot weather and you're not, and you're suspect. So. But we all try to pretend that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And I used to always call my peers' weaknesses out because I knew what they were, and I'm pretty confident they knew what they were. So I'd highlight them, trying to make them second guess themselves. Because in Ironman racing, physicality is, everyone's physically fit, everyone's there. It's all your ability to suffer and your ability to go deep into the well, because you're not moving quick. We're running a 240 marathon, mate. Like it's 4 minutes a K, and a little quicker, 3:55 per K. So everyone can do it. You're just in agony doing it, and you're depleted of fuel. You've just got to keep putting one foot in front of the other. And all you're having is this shitty conversation with yourself for hours on fighting that desire to stop, and so if you can create self-doubt, I always thought in my peer where they're like, oh, Macca's good, he told me it's going to happen. And I used to say it, you're going to run out of the energy lab, Crowley, and I'm going to be 5 minutes in front of you, and I'm going to drop you like a bad habit, because I always have. I did it in training my whole life. I did it as an athlete since we were juniors. You're not good enough to beat me. And you know it, and I know it, right? I was just saying that as bravado. Like I was scared to death of Craig Alexander and scared to death of, but I just thought if I could just look like I wasn't. I've been in that position when I'm stripped emotionally and physically and stripped at the end of a major endurance event, an Ironman, and it's those bubbling negativities that shape the race. It's not physicality anymore. It's not whether I did that track set or whether I've done another long run. No, that's all out the door. You're ugly. You're really ugly moving, and it's just headspace, and it's about being able to deal with those conversations. And I found the best way was to try and call my peers out and then live that sort of, I guess, self-fulfilling prophecy. You are the man, you can do this, you're better than him. And that was the motivation I got from grit, I guess. I liked anger and I liked challenging like my peers.
That is
I like
awesome.
The street fight, I guess. Yeah.
That is so good. I had Emma Carney on here last week, and one thing that she said to me that I was laughing at, just because I loved that she said it and just said it so casually, she was talking about how in the 90s, like triathletes around Australia were pretty well known, and she was about, you might have been on the team, I don't know. Yeah. She was about to get on a plane. She was about to get on a plane to go to Europe. And the lady who was checking the flight in said, hey, Emma, I recognize you. The plane's a little bit empty. I'm going to give you the sheet of paper of all the passengers. on here, and I'm going to upgrade you to first class. And I'm also going to upgrade any of the women, any of the team that you want to be in first class with you. And she goes, oh, that's nice. Awesome. So she got the sheet of paper. They were all going over to race. And she said, she goes, I got that piece of paper and a highlighter. She goes, you know what? I'm trying to beat these women. She goes, I upgraded the whole men's team and I just left all the other girls in economy just so
I remember that.
Just when they
we'll go to Japan, man. And we all got upgraded. It was on the top deck. It was, and the only woman that got upgraded was Sian Welsh, which is Greg Welsh's wife.
I thought that was awesome.
Emma was hardcore, man. Like Emma
I got that vibe, man. I really liked talking to her, but I was like, mate, I would have been so scared being on her wrong side. And I said this to her. I would have been terrified lining up against you. She's like, yeah, that's what I wanted.
She was tough. She was just a hard woman. And that whole Australian era, McKeely Jones was sort of at the forefront of it, but Emma came along with Claire and we had Loretta Harrop and they were just a tough generation of women. Like, I mean, their physicality, their grit, and I'm not going to semi-animosity towards each other. It was a crowded. What I think they struggled with was not only were you fighting to be the best in the world, but you couldn't even call yourself the best in your country. You know what I mean? Like, you could be you're the fifth best in Australia, but you're the fifth best in the world on the women's side. So they're like, oh, you can't even win an Australian title. Like, I remember 99 Worlds, the Australian women's team went first, second, third, fourth, fifth at the World Championships. It was amazing.
That's incredible, man. Macca, I could talk to you all day, but my lovely wife, I asked her to go for a walk for an hour while we had a chat, and she's been nice. She's standing out here in the cold with my little man, and I've been trying to tell her to come in and quietly go upstairs for the last 10 minutes, but she can't see me waving my arms. So, Macca, I might, mate, as I said, I could talk to you all day and appreciate how much time you've made, but just so my marriage isn't on the rocks for the rest of this public holiday. Yeah. Mate, that was really, really enjoyable. And hey, you're always welcome. If you ever want to come back for a chat, let's do part 2, because there's 15 different directions I could have taken it.
Too easy. Anytime. Lovely.
Hey, get out. You're a legend, Macca.
Enjoy the long weekend.
Hey, yeah, right back at you. See you, man. Thanks again.
Okay. Cheers.
See you, brother. Bye.